Crushing the cultural Marxists, breaking the grip of corrupt oligarchs, and taking back our country through America first. Here's your host of Liberty and Reality, John Henson.
Welcome back to Liberty and Reality. Today we're going to talk about the mainstream debate over the Iran conflict. It seems that every day we get new updates about the Iran conflict. One day we are this close, just this close to peace. The next day, we hear threats of destroying bridges, power plants, oil infrastructure, and whatever else can hurt the enemy. It's very confusing. And I don't think that the mainstream narrative is telling the whole story. Matter of fact, I don't even know if the people involved understand the full story. I'm going to try to deconstruct that a little bit today. So I'm sure people have heard that critics of the Trump administration believe he is serving the needs of Israel. They point to a variety of things, including his son-in-law, Jared Kushner's deep family ties to Israel, his friendship with Bibi Netanyahu. And then you hear the allegations of Epstein being an Israeli agent, or he wasn't an Israeli agent, I should say. You need to put him in the past tense. And these are pretexts to cover up his elite accomplices in the service of Israel, presumably. And then you have the New York Times reporting that Trump decided to go to war based on a private Mossad briefing, while his own advisors advised him against it. Now, none of these things are petty. There are certainly reasons for concern, but this doesn't really get to the core of the problem. Now, on the other side, the proponents of the war, if you can call it that, argue Trump is the first president with the courage to face the long-standing Iran threat, and it has been long-standing, at least since the 80s. They point to Iran's openly stated desire to wipe out Israel. And they have stated that pretty often and pretty vociferously. Their nuclear weapons development and their decades of funding terror groups that target American and Israeli interests. All of these are legitimate concerns. And Iran has been a strategic rival, if not an outright enemy, to the United States for decades. But neither point of view fully encapsulates the issue. It's just noise in the long history of the conflict. What's really happening is a continuation of the class of civilizations that Samuel Huntington warned us about. Now, if you're not familiar with Samuel Huntington, I'll get into it here in a second. But to understand why we're fighting Iran, we must look deeper into the historical lens of the clash of civilizations. Samuel Huntington looked at the world after the fall of the Berlin Wall and warned us that the nature of global conflict was changing. Historically, wars were driven by ambitious kings fighting for territory, then by competing nation states, and finally by the 20th century battle of ideologies of communism and capitalism. But Huntington pointed out that when the Soviet Union collapsed, the ideological war ended. Now, in my opinion, it didn't, but it seemed to have at the time. It seemed to have been a clear victory for global capitalism, the free market, the free world, the liberal economic order. Now, Huntington explicitly told us that the Cold War conflicts would no longer be driven by economic systems or simple lines on a map. Matter of fact, his student, Francis Fukuyama, told us that it was the end of history. It would be the end of major wars. That the world would be satisfied with the new liberal democratic order. was wrong. Instead, Samuel Huntington pointed to the primary source of conflict in the future as cultural. The most dangerous violent flashpoints would occur along civilizational lines. These were the deep historic boundaries separating the world's major cultures. Right now, what we're watching is a clash between Western civilization and Islamic civilization. That is the root of the fight. Now, if you're not familiar with Samuel Huntington, in the early 90s, I think it was around 93, he wrote a very influential essay on this that was published in major magazines. Then he wrote a book, Clash of Civilizations. Either or both of those are very worthwhile read, and I definitely recommend you familiarize yourself with those. And if you don't want to read it, it's actually out there on YouTube and other services where he can read it to you, or somebody can read it to you. The true issues for Western advocates of the war isn't just Israel or the Jews, it's Zionism. Now, Zionism is a deeply held cultural belief in certain parts of Judaism and Christianity. It's a view held by millions. So we really need to look at the common goals of Zionism between Christians and Jews to understand what's going on. Zionism is arguably more popular and widely held among Trump's massive American Christian base than anywhere else. When critics charge these American Christians with serving Israel's interests, they are wrong. That's not what's going on here. They're serving their own deep messianic beliefs. This runs strong in Trump's base, in Trump's generation, and perhaps with Trump himself. These Christians are serving Western civilization as they define it. Furthermore, blaming a monolithic Israel for pushing this war isn't exactly factual. Israel has a large Muslim population. They have Muslims in their government. And internally, between all Israelis, there's a massive internal disagreement and intense debate over the Iran conflict. That includes Jews. So to decipher why Western advocates are pushing so aggressively for this war with Iran, we have to look past the shallow media talking points. The true issue isn't just Israel or Jews. It is the broader ideological framework of Zionism itself. We need to look closely at the common goals of Zionism that exist between Christians and Jews. Because understanding this intersection is the only way to make sense of American foreign policy. Now, Zionism at its core is the movement for self-determination and statehood of the Jewish people in their ancestral homeland. For Jewish Zionists, this is deeply rooted in thousands of years of historical, cultural, and religious identity. An existential necessity for people who have faced centuries of persecution and displacement. It is about maintaining a secure sovereign refuge in a deeply hostile region. But there's a second massive pillar of this movement that the mainstream media completely misunderstands, and that is Christian Zionism. To understand the political willpower behind this war, you must realize Zionism is arguably more popular and more vocal and shared among far more people within the American Christian community than anywhere else, including Israel. So when you look at these two groups, they share a massive overlapping geopolitical goal: the defense, preservation, and flourishing of a sovereign Israel. But their underlying motivations are vastly different. While Jewish Zionism is focused on national survival and historical continuity, Christian Zionism is fueled by an entirely different engine, and that is prophecy. Millions of Christians across America view the modern state of Israel not merely as a foreign ally or political democracy, fundamentally direct biblical prophecy. In their theological framework, the gathering of the Jewish people back to their homeland is a necessity. It is divinely ordained to the end times timeline and the ultimate return of the Messiah. This means critics aggressively charge the American right with blindly serving a foreign government's interests, they are fundamentally misdiagnosing the problem. These citizens aren't acting as agents of a foreign power. They are acting in total alignment with their own deeply held internal messianic beliefs. This conviction runs incredibly deep within Trump's primary voting base, within Trump's specific generation, and quite possibly within the administration itself. They support this war because, in their minds, they aren't serving Tel Aviv, they're serving Western civilization and the divine destiny as they define it. Till the anti war movement learns to recognize that they are arguing against a deeply entrenched religious worldview that is central to Western civilization rather than a mere political lobbying effort that will continue to lose the debate. Now, on the other side of this fault line, Islamic civilization has been at war with Western civilization to one degree or another for centuries. Iran does not view this conflict through a simple economic lens. For them, this is a matter of total civilizational survival and national honor, concepts for which they are entirely willing to sacrifice wealth and infrastructure. Now, because this is a civilizational friction point, any future peace will never be permanent. It will only be a temporary hiatus before the civilizations clash again. When we look at the anti war opposition to the Iran conflict, we see two dominant factions: the right wing non interventionists and the left wing Marxist radicals. On the surface, they might sound similar because they are both yelling no new wars, but their perspectives are fundamentally different. More importantly, neither of them gets to the core of the problem. The right wing anti war perspective is rooted in American interests, constitutional limits, and a desire to avoid bleeding our treasury and soldiers for foreign entanglements. It is an argument based on national sovereign and practical restraint. It is very popular within the America First movement. Now, the Marxist anti war perspective is entirely different. It does not oppose war out of a love for America. It opposes war because it views the United States and the West as ultimate global oppressors. To the Marxist, any action taken by a Western nation is an act of imperial aggression, and any hostile foreign regime, no matter how brutal, is an oppressed victim that must be defended. Think about places like Cuba, and North Korea, and even China. Now, neither side sees the real picture because our entire cultural environment has been completely blinded. To find the truth, we have to look back at Samuel Huntington. Huntington wrote his Clash of Civilizations thesis at a unique moment of post Cold War unity, right when the West naively believed its liberal ideas had won forever. He explicitly published his work as a stark warning so we could anticipate deep cultural differences and manage them intelligently, not as some inherently malicious text. But look at how his ideas are treated today among some academics. Hunting's civilizational warning is broadly attacked and dismissed across our entire media and political landscape as racist. Why? Because our entire cultural environment has been completely infected with Marxist class struggle narratives. This isn't just a localized problem confined to radical university classrooms. This narrative has completely taken over our political dialogue, our media, and our institutions. The Marxist class struggle has forced internal division that are actively destroying Western unity from within. Marxism is a little disease that breeds and worsens these conflicts. By training an entire generation to view every single global issue through a rigid, fake binary of domestic oppressor versus oppressed, completely paralyzes us. It blinds the West to the actual civilizational threats that are actively gathering outside our borders. The right wing anti war crowd is distracted by the immediate political costs, while the Marxist anti war crowd is actively rooting for our civilizational enemies. Neither of them understands that we are trapped in a multi century, immovable friction point between Western civilization and Islamic civilization. Marxism has infected the debate, forced us into permanent internal screaming matches, and ensured that our leaders remain totally blind to the real fight. Anti war voices try to compare this to the Iraq War, but Iran and Iraq are fundamentally different. Saddam Hussein's Iraq was a proven expansionary power that presented an immediate physical threat to the U.S. regional interests. There was a genuine international unity behind the initial Iraq action. It was never meant as an attack on Islam, even though Western liberals and the Islamic world order later tried to define it as one. It could actually be described as an economic fight, a fight to prevent Saddam Hussein from dominating the region's oil resources. Now, remember, not only had Saddam invaded Kuwait, but he had fought a long war with Iran before that. A very violent war where he actually used chemical weapons against the Iranians. Militarily, Iraq was a massive success for us. U.S. forces rapidly crushed the Iraqi army and achieved objectives. The failure in Iraq lay entirely with the post war architects who did not understand the civilizational clash they walked into. Western liberals, inspired by Marxist class struggle concepts, made the post war failure worse by inventing the false specter of Islamophobia to shield Islamic civilization from any critique, ensuring that the U.S. could never find a lasting solution. I think we see this going on a lot today across the West. The liberal political establishment does not want to criticize Islam anywhere, despite the obvious issues it presents, even with their worldview. Everything from their positions on homosexuality to violence and to crime. This does not mean that all Muslims are inherently problematic, but at a civilizational level, you can see it. Just look at what's going on in the United Kingdom. Now, the total post war unraveling in Iraq occurred because Western civilian bureaucrats made the bad assumption that the Iraqi people would universally see the United States as liberators. They completely failed to understand the deep clash of civilization elements at play. Even though many Iraqis hated the Saddam regime, their civilizational loyalty overrode everything else, causing them to see the U.S. as a foreign Western invader. Now, these raw cultural elements were quickly marshaled by various religious and cultural leaders who weaponized those resentments to build radical insurgencies against our forces. The United States spent years bleeding in a conflict it didn't understand, and the insurgency was not brought under control until the surge essentially acted as a mechanism to pay off the Sunni tribal leaders, stop fighting the United States forces. The entire historical lessons proved that while there can never truly be a permanent peace between Western and Islamic civilization, there absolutely can be transactional common ground to prevent active fighting. This should be the model for peace in the future. The only feasible option is to find mutually beneficial arrangements that can keep peace between Iran and the United States. We've seen this work in much of the Sunni world, where leaders profit from the Western petrodollar. Because they make money, they actively contain the radical elements within their own civilization. And remember, it was Saudis, Sunni radicals from Saudi Arabia, that attacked us on 9/11. Those are the forces that Western oil money now keeps under control. Conversely, American Zionists also profit from the current global arrangement, allowing that specific alliance to hold peace. Now, our policymakers must look inward to find solutions, and all sides, including Iran, must stop the divisive rhetoric. Unfortunately, Iran has brought much of this problem on themselves through their constant threats. When you threaten to destroy an entire civilization, you got to expect that civilization is going to take it seriously, especially when they're your neighbor. But a solution exists. If we can stop using this bad political framing against each other, understand the root civilizational fight, finding a mutually beneficial solution that makes future cooperation profitable, future conflict painful. Now, isn't that the promise of Francis Fukuyama and the end of history? The globalized economic world that we were told would exist? This conflict needs to stop being about the insurmountable cultural disagreements and be about the very real and beneficial economic agreements. It's the only way to peace. Thank you for watching. I will come out with new content the next couple of days. I appreciate my watchers and listeners. Take care, everybody.